My name is Amy Brenmone, and I serve as president of the City Council, and I represent Ward 5. And my colleagues and I, and thank you so much for coming out here tonight. Just to be very authentic and straightforward about really what we're trying tonight. Last year, we had a pretty amazing budget presented to us by Mayor Melvin Carter with a lot of investment, a lot of new initiatives, and just a lot going on. And we worked really hard on the budget. We went through a long budget process. And in sometime in about December, we're required by the state of Minnesota to have something called the Truth in Taxation hearing. And when it came time for the Truth in Taxation hearing, lots of groups organized and came out to talk to the City Council about what they wanted to see in the budget, and they expressed some frustration that it felt like the budget was already pretty decided. And I would say by the late November and December, the budget really is pretty decided, and so that was a legitimate point and really legitimate feedback. So what we thought we would try this year, in response to that feedback we got, was to get people engaged much earlier in the process by having a kind of a let's hear your voice, share our thoughts, following the mayor's budget presentation. And so I want you to bear with us a little bit because this is the first time we've done this, and it's a kind of a living experiment. We're going to see how this works, but what our intention truly is to get your thoughts and feedback very early in the process, so as we move through what has typically been our defined budget process, we know what people are thinking on the front end to get a better result on the back end. I will also say in full disclosure that my colleagues and I all heard the budget for the first time 7 days ago. And so this isn't an opportunity to dig deep with us and ask us, why did you do this? Or what is this about? Or what is this for? Because honestly, for the most part, we're just learning about it too. Mostly what we want to hear is, what are your priorities? What are the things that you've heard right now that you want us to make sure that we're asking? So as we go through the budget process, we're asking the right questions. So what we're going to do tonight is start out with a budget overview from our finance officer, Holly Houston. And she's going to basically give a similar presentation to what council members get that give us a basic overview of property taxes and the city's budget process. So we all have the same baseline of information. Then Susan Earle from the the Office of Financial Services is going to give us a brief summary of the mayor's budget. So then we all have that information in our heads, and we're going to break into discussion groups. There are 8 tables. We'll have a council member at each of the tables. You don't have to sit at the table that your council member is at. Perhaps you want to be at that table for a little while and move to another table. Maybe you want to float around the whole time. Maybe you really want to hear what your neighbors have to say and you want to stay at that table. That's all just fine with us. And again, we're learning too. So if this works, great. If we need to change it next year, great. We're going to be learning as we go. We also have an 8th table, and that will be womaned by Susan Earle from the Office of Financial Services. And this morning we kind of called it the nerd table, but that is not meant to be offensive. It just means that that's where people want to talk about the numbers. They want to understand about GO bonds or about our payback schedules or about what % of our properties are part of tax increment financing and those types of questions. She will be able to answer some of them. She may have to follow up, but there'll be another place to talk about those types of things. If we have time at the end, we could do some, call out or, to try to get some of the information back to the front of the room. I will have to see how it goes. Each one of the council members has their legislative aides with them today, and they're going to be carefully taking notes that they hear at the table. So regardless of how we close things up tonight, the information will get to our finance officer and to our council manager of operations, and all of the information will be compiled and shared with all the council members. So what you share at your table will be available to all of the council members in the end. So thank you for participating in this meeting, which is kind of an experiment, with a goal again to have more transparency on the front end of the budget for a better outcome at the end of the budget. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Houston. Thank you.
Council President Brenmo and council members and community members, thank you for that introduction. And thank you for coming tonight. Just a few other items of housekeeping. There are comment notes on the table or back by the cookies if you want to leave a written comment for us to review. That will also be collaborated and shared with all the council members. And then there's bathrooms down the hall, and either by the elevator banks or straight down the hall to your left, I believe. So with that, I'm gonna give an overview of the budget process and property taxes. And as Council President mentioned, this year we're holding this community event to get feedback on the mayor's proposed budget. We want to hear your feedback early. The City Council will be setting the levy limit by the end of September. So I'm excited to let you see, first ever, the premiere of our budget process video. Woohoo! We worked with OG.
The City of St. Paul provides services we use every day, from the streets we drive on, to the water we drink, to the parks, zoo, or libraries we visit. The city's police, fire, and Department of Safety and inspections ensure our city is a safe place to live, work, and play. Every year, the city creates a budget that represents our values and ensures our city works for all of us. How does the budget process work? Based on the feedback of residents, businesses, neighborhood organizations, city council, city departments, and others, in August, the mayor recommends a budget for the coming year. Following the mayor's budget address, the St. Paul City Council hosts a community event to discuss and evaluate the proposed budget. From August through November, the City Council reviews the budget and city departments brief the council on the impact of the recommended budget. These presentations are televised and open to the public. As a part of this review, the City Council sets a levy limit by the end of September. A levy limit is set which determines the maximum amount of property taxes that can be collected. At any point during this process, the City Council can make changes to the recommended budget and levy based on the feedback from you. In late November, property owners receive a proposed property tax statement. The property tax statement is an accumulation of the county, school, and city budgets. After property tax notices are mailed, the City Council holds a public hearing to hear from property owners on budget or tax issues related only to the city portion of the statement. Following these input sessions, the Council will work with the mayor to finalize the budget. At the end of the year, the City Council votes to adopt the budget. Where does the money come from? You might be surprised that only about 30% of the city's budget comes from property taxes. That means the majority of the budget, about 70%, comes from other sources like fees, fines, permits, and federal and state aid. How is the money distributed? For the average homeowner, the city accounts for about a third of your total property tax bill. The other portion of your bill goes to other taxing jurisdictions like the county and school district. To learn more about how departments are funded or more about the budget, visit stpaul.gov. You're an important part of the city's budget process. We welcome your feedback because your participation helps us achieve a city that works for all of us. The City of St. Paul.
Okay, so that was a quick overview of the budget process. If you're like budgets like me, you might want to watch it a few times. But I'm going to shift gears a little bit to talk about how property taxes work. I'm going to keep this as high level as I can. So how do property taxes, or what determines property taxes? So there's different things from the state legislature to the county assessor's office to the taxing jurisdictions. Each one has a different part in property taxes. So the state sets the tax policy, and the legislature this year has taken all actions in terms of setting the ground rules and making any changes to state aid and credits. At the beginning of each year, the county assessor's department determines the property valuation and classifications of each property. They determine the values based on history and market sales, and their determination is overseen by the Department of Revenue. There hasn't been any adjustments in years, so they feel pretty, they're happy with their valuation process. Valuation notices are mailed in March, so if you get like a property tax statement in March, that looks like that's your valuation. So that's what they're saying your property is valued at in 2019 for the 2020 taxes payable session. And then from the county, or from this taxing jurisdiction perspective, so that can be the city, county, the school district, and then there's a few others like the Railroad Association and the Housing Redevelopment Authority. They determine the levy amount, so that levy can also impact the property taxes, and the levy supports the budget. Why do property taxes change? There are many things that can impact property taxes each year, and they can change each year, such as the market value of your property, the market value of properties or classifications around you, any legislative changes, and then the local taxing jurisdiction levy change. Our taxing environment this year, the property values in 2019 increased overall by 6.4% in St. Paul. Significant property taxes continue amongst properties in St. Paul. The market value for residential properties grew 7.4%. The commercial property rate grew 1.3%, and apartments grew 8.3%. As property types grow, as property taxes growth changes, the property tax burden shifts between different property and classifications. This year, the city's fiscal disparity levy, this year the fiscal disparities distribution increased for the city of St. Paul. This will help the city's levy for the most properties be reduced. So this is an example just to show you how the shifts that I've been talking about from classification to market value to fiscal disparities all impact your taxes. So this, what we're looking at is a single family median valued home at $199,800, which increased 7.3% from last year. This includes the county change of 4.75%, but no changes to any, and the 7% change to the regional rail, but no other changes. So I'll start at the top. So the final payable 2019 taxes was $2,828. Because of the change in fiscal disparities, that's a benefit to the city, or well, a benefit to all taxing jurisdictions and a benefit to you. Your property tax bill would be reduced by $76. Because of this property, I'm going to make sure I say this right. The homestead exclusion benefit is governed by the state legislature, and as a property value increases, the credit decreases. So here, this property is getting a $16 increase. And then because of the other taxing shifts, there's an additional $45. So the net change before anything is done, before any changes are done to any taxing jurisdiction levy, is a decrease of $15. And then as each of the taxing jurisdictions set their levy, that will start to fill in down below. And then the column on the right, it just shows the net impact to your property tax bill because there's other shifts happening. And this is, I'm sure, hard to read, but all these materials will be posted online after or tomorrow. So this breaks out the median valued home by planning district. This shows a fair amount of variability in each district. So without any, and this shows a median valued home per planning district, and it doesn't show any increase to levy in 2020. So if the city's levy stayed the same as last year, your property tax bill would still look different this year because of those tax shifts I mentioned. And so this shows you that quite a few planning districts would see an increase with no changes to the property tax levy. I'll just point out that the Thomas Dale has seen the largest property value increase at 18.6%, which translates, and that's number 7, which translates into a 15.7% tax increase. The property tax refund column on the far right shows a potential credit. So qualifying properties that apply may receive a reduction in their property tax bill. If you're a homestead property and saw 12% growth in your property tax, you may be eligible for this credit. The credit is equal to 60% of the cost above the 12% increase. And there's documents on how to apply for that and also more information. That program is offered through the Department of Revenue. So switching gears slightly, Ms. Earl will talk more about the budget in just a few moments, but from a high level, the city's overall budget is $621 million. Of that, the general fund is 52%. Property taxes as well as local government aid and other fees for service support the general fund, and special funds are fully supported by grants, fees for service. This is a breakdown of the revenue that the city has, and this is showing you that property taxes are 30% of the city's revenue. The other funding sources, oh, I have an error in my, that wasn't there, but we'll get that corrected. And then this shows you how your property tax bill is split between all taxing jurisdictions. This is an example from 2019. So you can see that the city of St. Paul received, for a median valued home, received $831, and it paid for a variety of services. The other part of your bill went to the other taxing jurisdictions listed there. So we're here today to hear your feedback and opinions. The City Council wants to hear from you, and so there's different ways to do that. You can contact them by phone, email, or in person. There are handouts on how to, in the back by the cookies. If I ran out, I'll make sure those are posted online, or we can try to print a few more. But that's how to contact your council member's ward office, their phone number, email, and also we have if you email councilbudget@ci.stpaul.mn.us, I will get that feedback and share it with all the council members. Also, all of our agendas and materials that the departments present to the City Council are online and available, and so that is one way to access the information. They're also recorded, so all the department presentations are recorded if you can't come to City Hall at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays. And you are also welcome to attend those meetings and listen to them. So just a few key dates and how to get involved. The levy limit, as I mentioned, is set to be voted on September 18th at 3:30. Most Wednesday mornings, the budget committee meets at 10 a.m. As I mentioned, you can attend or view those online. The property tax estimates mailed. So once all the maximum or levy limits are set, then Ramsey County does all the math and sends you out a property tax estimate bill with all of those new levies on it. And then we have a public hearing to hear your feedback on potential tax or budget issues on December 4th at 6. And then the final vote for adoption is December 11th. And then these are the resources that I mentioned. There's the homeowner homestead credit refund program. Also, the county assessor is a resource if you have questions about your property tax assessment. And then you can also look up your property tax if you don't know what your estimate was or if you didn't see that March statement. On the City of St. Paul, we have all of our budget information posted online. The City Council budget schedule is posted at stpaul.gov council budget. And as I mentioned, we have our council budget email address. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Susan Earl to give you highlights of the mayor's proposed 2020 budget.
Thanks. As Holly mentioned and Council President Benmone mentioned, I'm Susan Earl. I'm with the Office of Financial Services in the Budget Division. So I'm really excited to be here to run through some highlights of the Mayor Carter's 2020 proposed budget. First, I'm going to set a little bit of context for what I'll be sharing with you all today. I'm going to keep it pretty high level, first share a little context, and then some of the highlights from the budget. The focus of this presentation is going to be on the City General Fund. So in addition to that, we've got the library, the St. Paul Public Library is a separate part of our budget and a separate entity, and then also the Housing and Redevelopment Authority. And so those budgets are separate. They're all make up like sort of the whole piece and the whole puzzle of St. Paul's budget, but won't be the focus of what I'm going to run through tonight. And then also won't be necessarily focusing on special funds, and those are funds that account for things like grant revenue or dedicated fees or internal service funds. Those aren't funded with the levy, and so I'm focusing on the general fund since that's what the proposed levy is funding. But all of that information is available online. You can dive deep into all of those different pieces of the budget in our budget documents that are available online. So first, just a little context on our general fund budget. This is our proposed spending by category, and you can see that almost 80% of our general fund budget goes to salaries or fringes, so people, the employees that we have that do the work of the city every day. And that means that our general fund faces pretty significant inflationary pressures each year as wages and costs of healthcare and other benefits rise every year. Conversely, oh no. Sorry about that. We have a graph like this in our budget book, but what this is showing you is that our revenues, and so those two categories, these are also our general fund spending categories, and those should be police and fire. So I apologize that those category names didn't come through in the presentation. But this is just showing you that about over half of our general fund budget is funding public safety. So that those two things combined, the fact that our general fund budget is a lot of salaries and fringes, and primarily or almost over half is our public safety. Those public safety contracts really put a lot of pressure on our city budget. So I'm kind of bummed. I think this is going to happen for the whole presentation, and I apologize. So this is showing that our local government aid and our property taxes account for about 63.5% of our general fund revenue, and these don't grow naturally, or we have to either get an increase in our LGA from the state or take action to raise the levy. And so this is, so our revenues don't grow every year the same way that our spending grows every year. So we end up with this mismatch, and this is what, Mayor Carter has talked about, our $17.1 million budget gap. This is what drives a lot of that every year. The fact that we have a budget gap is because our spending grows every year and our revenues don't naturally grow. Our big chunks of revenue don't naturally grow every year. Another important piece of context for our budget is our local government aid, and so wanted to touch briefly on how local government aid is calculated. This is a simplified view of what the formula is in state law. What this shows is that basically the math that's done is we compare what we need as a city. So that's our need per capita, which is based on factors like housing stock and the number of jobs in the city, and our population. And then that's compared to our tax capacity. So it's essentially what we can afford, which our tax capacity times the statewide average of city tax rates. And then we get to this number that's called unmet need in state law. And that's essentially what LGA should be funding. According to the state formula, here's what the state would be funding in order to meet our basic needs for us and every other city in Minnesota. But the state law doesn't, so the appropriation for LGA doesn't fully fund what the unmet need formula would generate, and so we end up with a mismatch. You can see the past 2019 and 2020, our unmet need was $106 million and $108 million respectively, and our LGA 65 and 69 million. While we did get an increase in LGA this year, which definitely helped our budget gap, you can still see that our LGA isn't at what the state formula would be calculating. And I think it's just another important context to remember as we're setting city budgets overall, that this is one of the factors and one of the sources of revenue that we have in our city, and where we're at relative to what the state formula would say our need is from local government aid. The next I'm going to go through proposed budget, the proposed budget gap that we started with. Mayor Carter talked about our $17.1 million budget gap, and then in broad strokes how we solve that budget gap. And I'm hoping that my data labels are going to work on this one too. No, should we try and do the other one? Oh, sure. I'm sorry about that. He put it in. Oh, great. Okay.
Try it from there. So.
28. Yeah. Must have been something that I copied it over.
Just say the
Sure, I
value.
can just read the values. Some of them. I can just, yeah, we can just go through that. Yep, I've got them on here. So I'm sorry about that. I'll make sure that an updated version of this gets posted on City Council's website so that all of the numbers that should be there show up. And if you want, I have a hard copy here, and so if you want to come sit at the nerd table, I can show you what they are tonight. So the first one, 2019 personnel tails, this should say 3.7 million. This is a number, when we implement contracts, some of them were implemented on a delayed basis, and so this catches up and accounts for a full year of what those negotiated increases are. The second one, our biggest one, is 2020 contracts, and that's $8.8 million. That is our cost of the negotiated contracts for wages and fringes negotiated with all of our unions in the city. That's the increased cost for personnel in 2020. The next number is almost $1 million for a leap year. 2020 is a leap year, and I know it sounds odd, but everyone in the city will work another 8 hours in 2020. And if we didn't account for that 8 hours sounds like a small amount, but if we didn't account for that for every city employee, we'd end up short. And so we want to make sure that we're accounting for that when we need to write everyone their paychecks in 2020. 1.5 million for inflation. This is on non-salary goods and services. $1.1 million of an increase in order to continue to pay our general obligation debt. And then other planned increases account for another 1.1 million. These are for planned program increases. A great example is rec centers coming online. And so knowing that once a new rec center comes online, it's going to need different staffing, new staffing. That's something that we plan for, and we know that that's something we'll need to budget for in 2020. So got almost all of these. So the first value on the bottom, so this is our solution to our gap, or how Mayor Carter is proposing to close that 2020 budget gap and what we'd be funding in his budget. $4 million was LGA, so the LGA increase that we referenced on an earlier slide contributed $4 million to our budget solution. $7.4 million is what's generated by the property tax levy that Mayor Carter's proposed. 3.1 are other revenues. These are things that grow from like a volume-based or just trends that we see in our revenues, being able to account for growth in other places in the budget. $500,000 in other spending adjustments, and then $4.5 million in department reductions. And so I know Mayor Carter talked about that in his speech, and I'll touch on it a little bit more. But every department in the city is taking reductions in the 2020 budget. And so $4.5 million was part of that budget solution. Some of that is reinvested. And so there are new investments and new initiatives and new funding in Mayor Carter's budget, and that's another $2.3 million of new spending. So this is in broad strokes how the mayor is proposing to close our 2020 budget gap. So quick set of budget highlights. There's a lot more online. I'm happy to talk a lot more about any of what I'm about to go through, but just really big picture, $622 million, our total budget. It's a $9.7 million $1.6 million increase over our 2019 all funds budget. We have 4.23 fewer FTEs in 2020 versus 2019. And the Mayor Carter's total proposed levy, $163.6 million, funds the general fund, the St. Paul Library General Fund, and our general obligation debt. So just wanted to highlight a few proposed investments. This, by all means, isn't the full budget, but just a couple things to highlight. First, $40 million in street sidewalks and bikeways is included in Mayor Carter's budget, and this is street repaving and resurfacing. Also includes electric vehicle charging hubs and implementation of the downtown bike plan. $350,000 for children and families, specifically a library social worker, so making the funding for the library social worker permanent, and expanding rec center hours due to St. Paul Public Schools changing start times, so making sure we have rec center staffed when kids are going to be out of school. And $1.15 million for workforces and businesses, bank on to increase accessibility to fair banking, funding for minimum wage implementation staffing, and also business development work within the PD and the Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and a new deputy director in human resources to focus on training for city's workforce. As I mentioned, the mayor also has included reductions in efficiencies in all city departments. So a couple things to highlight. $1 million in public safety reductions, so that's between the police and the fire department. The 2020 proposed budget scales back our 2019 investment of 9 new officers by eliminating 5 vacant positions in the police department. And then there are also personnel and non-personnel reductions in the fire department. And then the additional $3.5 million is spread across all other city departments, reductions in efficiencies across departments in both frontline service departments like libraries, parks, and public works, and internal service departments like finance, HR, technology. The mayor does include a few sources of new revenue. So these are policy changes that are included in the mayor's budget for revenue. Increases in animal licensing fees and recognizing revenue for sheltering animals from neighboring jurisdictions, and a 2% increase in both business licenses and building permits and DSI. And then in parks, $5 per day rec check fee for kids not participating in free and reduced lunch programs, and the ability to accept credit card donations at Como. I just want to include this slide just so everyone knows this. So the capital budget, just wanted to quickly highlight it. Won't go into a lot of detail. Again, that's available online. But the capital budget is separate from our operating budget, and this is for just like it sounds, big capital purchases. So like fire stations, parks program, like parks. Capital investments, capital maintenance funding, those types of things are included in our capital budget. Street repavings, those sorts of things on the public works side. And also this year that I just wanted to highlight, we have a new community process for our capital budget in the second year. So we've set aside $1 million of our capital budget allocation over every 2-year cycle for community projects to come forward. And we're going to have more coming out on that next year's when that process will get underway. But that's new for this year, and so wanted to make sure to highlight that that's another way to get involved and to be have more community input, more specific community input into our capital budget process. Finally, showing just a quick, we call this our typical home view, so looking at all fees, property taxes, what the impact would be on a median home. So this includes both property taxes and then also proposed changes to sewer fees, any recycling fee changes or residential waste collection fee changes. We have zeros on both of those this year. So final all-in $82 change is what's proposed in Mayor Carter's budget. $55 of that is property taxes, the remainder being made up with other fees. Finally, a couple more resources to share. Our budget, as Ms. Houston mentioned, is all online. We have an open budget portal that we're just about done populating that will have downloadable data and interactive charts that you can go and look up our budget. And finally, a property tax estimator. So I know we talk a lot about the median home and the impact on a median home, but most of us, probably none of us, actually live in that home and have that median property tax change. And so you can go online and use this to estimate the changes that are being proposed for your specific property for the city property tax portion. And that's all I've got. If folks have questions, and again, I apologize about the labels on my graphs. Happy to share if you want to stop by the nerd table. So, thanks.
Now you're all budget experts. It's a lot of information. So what we're going to do quick is I'd like my colleagues to just, for people who may not know who their council member is or people who haven't interacted with them before, we're just going to quick say our name and the areas geographically that we represent, and then we're going to break into rooms. And this experiment that we're having seems to be working out great. There's a lot of people here. So we are going to bring a few wards into the nearby conference room so that we have seats for people and we can engage in conversation. So my name is Amy Brunmone. I represent Ward 5, which is the northern and eastern part of Como. The majority of the north end, primarily up north of Front Street, including the area called Buffalo Ridge, and also the east side from the interstate highway to Edgerton, from Larpenteur all the way down to Railroad Island.
Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Naker and I represent Ward 2, which includes the Summit Hill neighborhood south of Summit up until Ide Mill Road, the West 7th neighborhood all the way up until about 35E, all of downtown and all of the west side. And I think we're going to be going into one of those other rooms, so follow me out.
My name is Kasim Basuri. I'm the council member for Ward 6. I represent areas from Edgerton all the way to McKnight, 7th and Minnehaha all the way up to Larpenteur.
In Prince, Ward 7, I represent roughly the south half of the east side, the neighborhoods of Dayton's Bluff, Eastview, Eastern Heights, Battle Creek, Highwood, and I think that's it. But out to Maplewood and down to Newport.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Mitra Jalali Nelson. I'm really proud to represent Ward 4, and I represent the neighborhoods of Hamlin Midway, St. Anthony Park, the other half of Como that's not represented by Council President Brent Moen. I represent Union Park and Marion Park, a very tiny slice of Mac Grove, only as far south as St. Clair. There's a lot of parks. I don't want to leave anybody off. I think that's everything. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for coming down here. Name is Councilmember Dai Tao. It's an honor and privilege to serve Ward 1. To the south is Summit Avenue. To the north is Front. To the west is Snelling. And to the east is the Capitol that goes up to Mount Airy. Again, thanks for being here tonight.
Welcome everybody. My name is Chris Tolbert. I represent the 3rd Ward. It is the southwest portion of the city, Highland Park, most of McAllister, Groveland, and part of West 7th. So welcome everybody, and thank you for coming out and being a part of this process.